Today we're answering some of the most frequently asked questions when it comes to flood insurance for real estate investors on buildings like this one right here. So let's get started. Hello, my name is Chris Greene, president and owner of the FloodInsuranceGuru, and today we're answering some of the most frequently asked questions real estate investors just like yourself have. So the first thing is, what is flood insurance? Maybe you went to buy a investment property like this, you found out flood insurance is going to be required. What is flood insurance? Flood insurance is a separate insurance policy because flood damage generally is not covered by your property insurance, and it covers one peril. And what by peril we mean is one particular type of disaster, that is flood. But when we're talking about flood, we're talking about either 2 acres or 2 properties of normally dry area that are inundated with water. That means that water actually needs to enter the building here, and it needs to be your building in order for flood insurance to pay out. Now, what flood zones are going to require you to purchase flood insurance? Well, if it begins with an A or a V and there's going to be a mortgage on the building, it's going to require flood insurance. Now, sometimes with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, we do see that flood zone X, if it's close enough to a certain different type of flood zone, they will require it. Now, let's talk about what coverages do you need on an investment property. If you're looking at the federal government, there's only 2 coverages available: building coverage and contents coverage. However, on the private side, there's building coverage, contents coverage, and loss of use. Now, if you're dealing with one of these private banks, they may be requiring you to take out a large sum of loss of use. Remember, this is like if your property was to flood, where you've got loss of rent, loss of income that's protected so that you just don't go bankrupt. So it's important to understand that you need building coverage, you need contents coverage to cover the things in here that are personal belongings maybe. There's certain appliances that may not be covered under building coverage, but the majority of these appliances are going to be covered under building coverage. So it's important to remember. And of course, loss of use if you're going on the private side. Now let's talk about pricing. What factors determine pricing? Well, let's start with the National Flood Insurance Program. The National Flood Insurance Program no longer uses flood zones to determine the rates for investment properties. What they use are things like the replacement cost of the building. The higher the replacement cost, the bigger impact it could have on your rate. They look at things like flooding frequency, the type of flooding, elevation of the structure above what's called the base flood elevation. That's the level that FEMA thinks flooding could come to. Claims history sometimes. If you've got a property that's had more than 2 claims since 2021, that could have an impact on your rate with the federal program. Now let's look at private side. On the private side, they still use flood zones some, but they also use a similar pool like the federal government does. Then they use something called a flood risk score. You can find that free flood risk score here on your property on our website, and it's going to tell you how close to water you are. It's going to tell you what the overall risk of a property flooding is from 0 to 100. It's going to tell you your estimated premium. It's going to tell you the flood zone that you're in, if flood insurance is going to be required. So that's how pricing works with private and the federal government. Now, as an investor, your time is limited, so it's important that you know that if you get a National Flood Insurance Program quote, it should be the same no matter where you go, unless you're taking over an existing owner's policy. However, on the private side, every company is going to be different, especially on investment properties. So you want to make sure you're getting at least 3 private flood insurance quotes as an investor. So these are some of the most commonly questions that we've gotten from real estate investors. Now let's talk about payment. Typically on these real estate investors, they're having to pay these policies up front. Now, flood has to be paid in full, typically no matter where you go. Now, if you're dealing with the federal government, it can be paid at closing, but with most private companies, it does have to be paid before then if you want the policy active at closing. Now let's talk a little bit about wait periods. And if you're buying one of these and you're required to take out flood insurance because of a loan, there should not be a wait period like there normally is because of loan transactions involved. So hopefully this answers some of your most frequently asked questions when it comes to flood insurance on real estate investment properties. Down on this page, if you're ready to take the next steps, you can go ahead and fill out that quote form and we can go ahead and start working on that for you. Thank you.